And now I'll go ahead and share screens. Alrighty, so you should be seeing Madison and Lafayette, the nation's guest at Montpelier. And once I pull up my notes, then we can get started. Okay, so my talk tonight is Madison and Lafayette, the nation's guest at Montpelier, and this is an auspicious date for it. It's the 200th anniversary of the day that Lafayette said his final farewells to Madison at Montpelier on August 22nd, 1826. Bicentennials are exciting things. Some of us remember the bicentennial celebrations for American independence in 1976. I do. In fact, I celebrated by making a museum in my parents' basement, which was the first exhibit I ever curated. The stamp, incidentally, was the first stamp in the U.S. bicentennial series. It was issued in 1971 when it cost 8 cents to mail a first-class letter. The rate had gone up to 13 cents by 1976. From the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence, we moved on to the bicentennial of the Constitution in 1987, which was the year that Montpelier opened to the public. And this is a screen grab of the TV coverage of the Constitution Parade in Philadelphia on September 17th, 1987. You truly can find anything on YouTube. And then there was the bicentennial of the Bill of Rights in 1991, when President George H.W. Bush visited Montpelier, and he spoke at a commemoration for the Bill of Rights anniversary on December 16th, 1991. So this is President Bush being welcomed by Christopher Scott, who was Montpelier's president at that time. So now in 2024-25, we're celebrating another bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the Marquis de Lafayette's triumphant return tour to the United States, which also proved to be his farewell tour. Lafayette, renowned as a Revolutionary War hero and a champion of liberty, returned to America for a 13-month tour in 1824 and 1825. His tour captured the public imagination in a way that's hard for us to fathom today. It was partly about Lafayette himself and partly about the mood of the country in 1824. So let's look first at Lafayette the man. Lafayette first came to America from his native France in 1777 and joined George Washington's staff at age 19. He was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine when a musket ball passed through his leg. He endured the brutal winter at Valley Forge. He fought at the Battle of Monmouth, near my hometown of Freehold, New Jersey. He led a division of troops at Yorktown in 1781, the last major battle of the Revolutionary War, which forced the surrender of British General Cornwallis. Returning to France, Lafayette continued to serve the cause of liberty during the French Revolution, and afterwards famously gifted the key to the Bastille to his mentor, Washington. Madison's own friendship with Lafayette began in September 1784. Madison was traveling when he had a chance encounter in Baltimore with Lafayette, who was on his way to negotiate a treaty with the Iroquois nation at Fort Stanwix, New York. Lafayette invited Madison to travel with him. As Madison wrote to his father from Philadelphia, "I fell in with the Marquis and had his company thus far. He presses me much to fall into his plan, and I am not sure that I shall decline it. It will carry me farther than I had proposed, but I shall be rewarded by the pleasure of his company and the further opportunity of gratifying my curiosity." Madison and Lafayette's month-long road trip from September 3rd to October 8th, 1784, turned out to be a bonding experience. Soon afterwards, Madison wrote a frank assessment of the Marquis's character to his close friend Thomas Jefferson, using a cipher or code in case the letter was read by anyone else. Quote, "The time I have lately passed with the Marquis has given me a pretty thorough insight into his character. With great natural frankness of temper, he unites much address with very considerable talents, a strong thirst of praise and popularity. In his politics, he says his three hobby horses are the alliance between France and the United States, the union of the latter, the United States, and the manumission of the slaves. The two former are the dearer to him, as they are connected with his personal glory. The last does him real honor, as it is a proof of his humanity. In a word, I take him to be as amiable a man as his vanity will admit, and as sincere an American as any Frenchman can be, one whose past services gratitude obliges us to acknowledge, and whose future friendship prudence requires us to cultivate." So Madison saw Lafayette as both talented and glory-seeking. But when Madison later edited his papers for publication, he apparently thought his initial assessment was a little too critical. Madison crossed out the phrase, "a strong thirst of praise and popularity," and changed "as amiable a man as his vanity will admit" to "as amiable a man as can be imagined." He even altered the coded words in the hope that no one would realize his early impression of Lafayette had been a little mixed, but he couldn't outsmart one of the editors on the papers of James Madison, who figured that all out. It's significant that Madison saw Lafayette's commitment to the abolition of slavery as a proof of his humanity. At this point in his life, Madison himself was still reconciling his thoughts on natural rights with the institution of slavery. In 1783, when his enslaved manservant Billy Gardner escaped, Madison's own ideas about liberty kept him from selling Billy as a punishment. He wrote to his father that he had decided to sell Billy Gardner into temporary servitude rather than penalizing him, quote, "merely for coveting that liberty which we have paid the price of so much blood, and proclaimed so often to be the right and worthy pursuit of every human being." Madison wrote in 1785 that "one of my wishes is to depend as little as possible on the labor of slaves," unquote, intending to try land speculation as an alternative way to earn income. By the time Madison inherited the Montpelier plantation from his father in 1801, though, his outlook seems to have changed. He thought less in terms of ending his personal dependence on enslaved laborers, and instead looked for a future end to slavery through colonization, which was the movement to emancipate enslaved people and resettle them in Africa or the Western territories of the United States. For his part, Lafayette was enthusiastic about the friendship he had established with Madison during their travels. He wrote effusively to Madison shortly before returning to France. "One of the most pleasing circumstances, not only of my voyage, but also of my life, has been to obtain as an intimate friend the man who before this time was only to me a valuable and agreeable acquaintance. Hitherto you had been my friend as the world calls it, but now I hope you are my friend as my heart reckons but few men. And once for all, I wanted to tell you that I know you, esteem you, and love you with all the warmth of my regard and affection." Although it would be 40 years before Madison and Lafayette saw each other again, their friendship continued. The two men corresponded steadily, exchanging at least 65 letters between 1785 and 1824. I've talked a bit about Lafayette the man. Now let's look at the mood of the country when Lafayette returned. By the 1820s, American pride was at a new height. The United States had won a second war for independence, the War of 1812, during James Madison's presidency. Then the country experienced an era of good feelings under Madison's successor, James Monroe. By the 1820s, the remaining soldiers and statesmen of the Revolutionary era were aging and revered in much the same way that we look at World War II veterans today. When Lafayette accepted President Monroe's invitation to return as the nation's guest in 1824, Americans took it as their last chance to pour out their affection and gratitude for the Frenchman who had helped the United States achieve independence. The nation's guest arrived in New York City on August 15th, 1824, and stayed for 13 months. As Lafayette traveled throughout the 24 United States, communities welcomed him with processions, artillery salutes, speeches, dinners, and balls. Young ladies strewed flowers or presented bouquets. Elderly veterans of the Revolution came out to shake his hand and share their war stories. Crowds waving handkerchiefs turned out in great numbers simply to catch a glimpse of the great man. Lafayette visited Washington's tomb at Mount Vernon, laid the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument, and participated in ceremonies marking the anniversary of the Battle of Yorktown. Beyond the official festivities, the tour also gave Lafayette a chance to reunite on a personal level with old friends, including James Madison. Lafayette visited the Madisons at Montpelier on two legs of his journey, in November 1824 and again in August 1825. As soon as Madison had heard that his old friend Lafayette had safely arrived in America, he immediately extended an invitation to visit Montpelier. Madison wrote, "I this instant learn, my dear friend, that you have safely reached the shores where you will be hailed by every voice of a free people. That of no one, as you will believe, springs more from the heart than mine. May I not hope that the course of your movements will give me an opportunity of proving it by the warmth of my embrace on my own threshold? Make me happy by a line to that effect when you can snatch a moment." Lafayette spent the month of September in New York and New England, making his way to Philadelphia by the end of the month. In October, he visited Baltimore, and at Fort McHenry, Lafayette was brought to tears to see that George Washington's marquee tent had been set up in his honor, a touchstone to his service under Washington's command. And this newspaper article reported Lafayette's arrival in Baltimore on October 7th and laid out his plans for the next several weeks. Lafayette was to proceed to Washington, D.C. to meet President Monroe and his cabinet on October 12th. On Tuesday, October 19th, he would attend an anniversary celebration of the surrender at Yorktown. After visits to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Norfolk, he would make his way to Central Virginia, visiting the country seats of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Lafayette arrived at Jefferson's home, Monticello, on November 4th. Madison joined Lafayette and Jefferson that evening about sunset, Madison's first opportunity to see Lafayette during the tour. The next day, the three men attended a dinner in Lafayette's honor at the University of Virginia. James Madison found a moment to write to his wife Dolly from Monticello. "My old friend embraced me with great warmth. He is in fine health and spirits, but so much increased in bulk and changed in aspect that I should not have known him. Now, as these two portraits suggest, Lafayette's appearance had changed significantly since Madison had last seen him. 40 years will do that. In the same letter, Madison wrote to Dolly, "The general does not say yet how many days he stays here," meaning Monticello. "It is probable he will not be with us at Montpelier till near or quite the middle of next week. He will have with him, besides his son and secretary, the two counselors, and such of the company of Orange meeting and conducting him as may choose to stop at Montpelier. I may learn more today, but not in time to write you." So that's something no hostess wants to hear, that it's still uncertain when the guest of honor is coming and exactly how many people are coming with him. Dolly initiated preparations nonetheless. Ailsie Payne, who was then an 18-year-old enslaved housemaid, later remembered stirring times when she was interviewed by a newspaper writer in the early 20th century. Ailsie described how she and other enslaved housemaids polished silver, put tablewares in order, and cleaned the house. The ice houses were filled with the meats that the enslaved cooks would prepare for an elaborate dinner, including mutton, beef, chickens, turkeys, ducks, and shoats. Ailsie particularly recalled how Dolly made sure the maids were well dressed for the occasion, since their appearance reflected on Dolly. Otherwise, as Ailsie explained, Dolly would have disqualified herself in her own house. Lafayette's plans had firmed up by the time he wrote from Monticello to Robert Lewis of Fredericksburg, quote, "We expect to leave here next Monday to dine in Montpelier and remain with my friend Mr. Madison until Friday, when we contemplate to partake of an early dinner with the citizens of Orange County at their courthouse, then to proceed as far as we can on the road to Fredericksburg." Now, next Monday meant that Lafayette would arrive at Montpelier on November 15th and stay until Friday, November 19th. The fluid nature of Lafayette's schedule was sometimes frustrating to local residents who wanted to organize appropriate welcomes. When Madison alerted his neighbor, former Governor James Barber, that Lafayette would be coming the next day, Barber replied in consternation, "Yours of this morning is the first intimation I have had of the general's approach. The shortness of the interval and our sparse situation present almost insuperable difficulties in making a suitable arrangement to meet him." Barber proposed meeting Lafayette's carriage at the county line near Gordonsville. He would bring his carriage and asked Madison to send his own carriage as well. Barber also asked Madison to relay a message to his nephew, Captain Conway Macon, regarding the plans to meet Lafayette. Despite the short notice, Barber successfully arranged a suitable escort for Lafayette. And as a newspaper reported, although his approach was known only a few hours before its occurrence, and the weather was extremely inclement, many of the respectable citizens went out to do him honor. He, his suite, and a most numerous and respectable escort of the citizens of Albemarle were met at Gordonsville, near the county line, by the Orange Committee of Arrangement, and an escort of mounted volunteers under the command of Captain Macon, Madison's nephew. Upon meeting, the citizens of both counties enthusiastically mingled their cheers. Lafayette and his party transferred to the carriages provided by the Committee of Arrangement, which presumably included Barber's and Madison's carriages, and traveled on to Montpelier, where they were affectionately received by Mr. Madison. As Ailsie Payne later remembered, there were more horses and carriages than you could hardly count. Lafayette didn't write about his visit, but his secretary, Auguste Levasseur, recorded his impressions in his journal. Levasseur's journal, which was later published, is perhaps the single most complete first-hand account that we have of the tour. Levasseur wrote, "Mr. Madison is now 74 years of age, but his body, which has been but little impaired, contains a mind still young and filled with a kind sensibility, which he showed in its full extent when he expressed to General Lafayette the pleasure he felt in having him in his house. Mrs. Madison also greatly contributes by the accomplishments of her mind and the elegance of her manners to render doubly delightful the unaffected hospitality which strangers are received at Montpelier." Levasseur continued, "The 4 days we spent at Mr. Madison's were agreeably divided between walks about his fine estate and the still more engaging conversations that we enjoyed in the evenings on the great interests of America, which are known to be so dear to Lafayette." And Levasseur specifically mentioned 2 topics that came up in conversation: slavery and religion. Levasseur wrote, "General Lafayette, who, while he well appreciates the unfortunate position of slaveholders in the United States, and cannot overlook the greater part of the obstacles which oppose an immediate emancipation of the blacks, still never fails to take advantage of an opportunity to defend the right which all men, without exception, have to liberty. Introduce the question of slavery among the friends of Mr. Madison." Levasseur's impression was that the company discussed the topic with frankness and expressed noble sentiments on that deplorable subject. Levasseur continued, perhaps a little naively, "It seems to me that slavery cannot subsist much longer in Virginia, for the principle is condemned by all enlightened men." Levasseur did not record anything that Madison said on the subject of slavery. Madison's opinions, if he shared them with the company, were probably similar to what he had written to Lafayette several years earlier. "The Negro slavery is, as you justly complain, a sad blot on our free country. No satisfactory plan has yet been devised for taking out the stain. If an adequate asylum could be found in Africa, that would be the appropriate destination for the unhappy race among us." Madison's ideas for ending slavery hinged on finding a site to relocate emancipated people, either in Africa or the American West. Since he later wrote to Lafayette, he believed that it seems to be indelible that the 2 races cannot coexist, both being free and equal. The Madison's guests soon turned the discussion of slavery to what Levasseur described as, quote, "the no less important question of mental slavery," meaning the limitations on religious freedom in many European nations. The friends of Mr. Madison congratulated themselves that at least this species of slavery is unknown in the United States, he wrote, observing that here, "no individual can be compelled to practice any religious worship, nor to frequent any place, nor to support any minister of any religion whatever. None can be persecuted in any manner on account of religious opinions, but all men have liberty to profess and sustain by argument their opinions in matters of religion. One guest made a point of drawing Levasseur aside to inform him of Madison's role in opposing a 1784 proposal to use Virginia state tax funds to pay teachers of the Christian religion. The next morning, the guest sent Levasseur a copy of Madison's petition, the Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. In it, Madison laid out 15 arguments in favor of the separation of church and state, and stated, "The religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man." Levasseur wrote that he perused the memorial with interest and found its principles so simple and so eloquently maintained and defended. A copy of the memorial and remonstrance was on display in Montpelier's dining room during Madison's retirement, but perhaps Levasseur wasn't able to peruse it on the wall by candlelight. Lafayette's departure from Montpelier on Friday, November 19th, was just as ceremonious as his arrival. As a newspaper reported, attended by Mr. Madison, the committee of arrangement, Captain Macon's numerous escort, and many respectable citizens, Lafayette proceeded to Orange Courthouse. Groups of citizens, on foot and on horseback, were seen on the road. As the general approached, he was everywhere hailed with shouts of applause. On his arrival at the courthouse, an extended line of citizens presented itself, along which he proceeded. Levasseur noted that while greeting the people in line, the general received expressions of regret from several old Revolutionary soldiers who had been prevented by age or distance from being present at the celebration at Yorktown, who now consoled themselves with his expressions of friendship and remembrance, by which they seemed greatly affected. After addresses and introductions, Madison accompanied Lafayette to a 3 o'clock dinner for 200 guests. Levasseur noted that after the repast, we separated from Mr. Madison, who, notwithstanding his 74 years, mounted his horse with activity and returned to his peaceful home alone through the woods. Meanwhile, Lafayette's party rode out of town and found a crowd gathered by a spot in the woods, where in 1781, Lafayette had opened a road for a rapid march against Lord Cornwallis. Young ladies were scattering flowers there by a triumphal arch, which is just another example of the fervor, the enthusiasm that Lafayette excited. A week later, Dolly recorded her impressions of the visit in a letter to her brother-in-law. "We have lately had a visit from General Lafayette and family of a few days. The former, you know, was an old friend of Mr. M's. I was charmed with his society, and never witnessed so much enthusiasm as his appearance occasioned here and at our courthouse, where hundreds of both sexes collected together to hail and welcome him. He has promised to spend some time with us again before he leaves the country." And just as Lafayette promised, he did make a final visit to his Virginia friends during his last weeks of his stay in August 1825. Levasseur observed in those last weeks, quote, "Although in all these towns the progress of Lafayette was marked by popular festivals, he could not avoid feeling pained by the recollection that in a few days he was about to leave, perhaps forever, a country which contained so many objects of his affection." Madison and Monroe joined Lafayette's party as they headed to Monticello to say goodbye to Jefferson. Levasseur noted the sadness of Lafayette's parting from the three statesmen and friends. Quote, "For in this instance, the individuals who bade farewell had all passed through a long career, and the immensity of the ocean would still add to the difficulties of a reunion." Levasseur's account was so focused on the poignant farewell at Monticello that he left out the details of the rest of Lafayette's travel itinerary, which included 2 stops at Montpelier on August 15th through 18th and August 21st to 22nd. But these details can be reconstructed from newspaper accounts and letters. And incidentally, that is a bust of Lafayette there to one side of the fireplace in the drawing room. According to one Washington newspaper, Lafayette left the capital city on August 6th to spend a few days with Monroe in Northern Virginia. After returning to Washington, Lafayette set out again. And this article from the Charleston Courier establishes that Lafayette arrived in Fredericksburg in the early hours of Sunday, August 14th. He attended church services there and left the next day, quote, "for the purpose of paying farewell visits to Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Madison." So here is the whole itinerary for the last month of Lafayette's trip. It kind of looks like you could put it on a concert tour t-shirt, doesn't it? So Lafayette and his party stayed at Montpelier from Monday the 15th to Thursday the 18th. And Lafayette's son, George Washington Lafayette, wrote a letter date-lined Montpelier, 16th August, 1825, in which he regretted being unable to visit some Richmond friends, explaining, quote, "Our time is so very short that it truly has become absolutely impossible. We are on our way to bid adieu to Mr. Jefferson, and it will require our best exertions to arrive at Washington City by the 25th of this month." Lafayette then stayed at Monticello from Thursday the 18th to Sunday the 21st, and we get those dates from a letter written by Jefferson's granddaughter. The touching scene described by Levasseur when Lafayette took his final leave of Jefferson at Monticello, with Madison and Monroe also present, must have taken place at the end of those few days. Lafayette with Monroe made one last stop at Montpelier on Sunday the 21st. Later that day, Culpeper residents Captain Philip Slaughter and Major Gabriel Long arrived at Montpelier. The 2 men had actually come to Montpelier during Lafayette's visit the previous week with an invitation to a dinner in Lafayette's honor in Culpeper. Captain Slaughter recorded in his journal that he and Major Long stayed the night at Montpelier on August 21st, and they escorted Lafayette's party to Culpeper the next morning, arriving in plenty of time for the dinner. As this Pennsylvania newspaper reported, Lafayette, his son, and his secretary Levasseur did indeed make it back to Washington by Thursday evening, August 25th. This article, like Levasseur's journal, focused on that remarkable moment of reunion and farewell at Monticello. The article states, "We cannot imagine any meeting of living individuals which it would have been so delightful and so impressive to witness as the interview between these 4 venerable men, Lafayette, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. What stations have they occupied? How conspicuous the parts they have acted, and what space they fill in the world's history. The group would have been complete could the patriarch Adams have been present." Lafayette's farewell tour was now coming to an end. He left Washington, D.C. for France on September the 7th, sailing on the USS Brandywine, which had just been renamed in honor of the Revolutionary War battle during which Lafayette had been wounded. When Lafayette and his entourage departed Montpelier at daybreak on August 22nd, 1825, it was the last time that Madison ever saw him. Madison wrote to Francis Wright, who was a sometimes traveling companion of Lafayette but had not made this part of the journey. General Lafayette took his final leave of us a few days ago. He carries with him the unanimous blessings of the free nation which has adopted him. As Lafayette suspected, he would not see Jefferson again. Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, less than a year after Lafayette's last visit. When Lafayette heard the news, he wrote to Madison, "My dear friend, we are few remaining of those old revolutionary times. I am by seas separated from the small band. But until I go to the departed ones, my heart is with you." Madison reflected the same sentiments in his reply. "You will never doubt that your happiness is very dear to me, and I feel the sentiment growing stronger as the loss of others, dear to us both, shortens the list to which we belong." In the same letter, Madison sent regards from his 95-year-old mother, Nellie Madison. "She forgets many things," she says, "but she'll never forget General Lafayette, the great and good friend of her country." As Madison observed, the list to which we belong, the list of people with personal ties to the American Revolution, was growing ever shorter. Jefferson and John Adams died in 1826, Monroe died in 1831, Lafayette in 1834, and Madison in 1836. In another 50 years or so after Madison's death, an elderly Ailsie Payne, along with the once young ladies who had presented bouquets to Lafayette, would tell stories of the farewell tour as if the tour itself was an event in a long ago history. The current bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour offers an opportunity to renew our appreciation of Lafayette's contributions to American independence and the cause of human freedom. For that reason, the Lafayette Trail Project set out to document, map, and mark the sites Lafayette visited in 1824 and 1825. To date, they've installed over 150 markers in 26 states. The Montpelier Foundation was honored to receive a Lafayette Trail marker on November 15th, 2021, installed near our historic train depot. You can also find one in downtown Orange, located in front of the Orange County Historical Society. And the American Friends of Lafayette has coordinated about 200 events across the country in places that Lafayette visited, beginning in New York City in August 2024 and concluding next month in Washington, D.C. Here at Montpelier, we staged a reenactment of Lafayette's arrival last November in cooperation with the American Friends of Lafayette. You may have already seen this photo of the event, which we used in the publicity for my talk tonight. Our event took place on November 16th, 2024, which was technically the bicentennial of the day after Lafayette arrived. But the American Friends of Lafayette had to compact commemorative events at UVA, Montpelier, and Monticello into one 3-day weekend in 2024, even though Lafayette's visits to those places took place over a 2-week period in 1824. So we fudged a little. In case you weren't able to join us last November, I'll share a few shots of the event taken by our staff photographer and graphic designer, Jenny Spencer. One thing I learned was that it takes a really long time to drive a carriage from the entrance to Montpelier all the way to the carriage turnaround. This was our first sighting, where you see the blue arrow there. Now they're getting a little closer. And the crowd was getting excited. We even had a junior Lafayette who was sharing the news via smartphone. James and Dolly were eagerly awaiting their guest's arrival. And some of you are probably familiar with John Douglas Hall, who frequently portrays James Madison for us, and that's Catherine Spivey presiding as Dolly. And here's Lafayette's carriage about 15 minutes later than when he started, coming around the bend of the carriage drive. The horses, carriages, and drivers were provided for us by the Shenandoah Carriage Company. And at last, Lafayette alights from the carriage. You can see him here waving to the crowd in the top hat and the buff-colored trousers. Now, we only had one carriage for the reenactment, but just imagine this scene with more horses and carriages than you could hardly count, as Ailsie Payne remembered it. And Lafayette is portrayed by Mark Schneider from Colonial Williamsburg. Lafayette came up to the portico and shared a heartfelt embrace with James Madison. And here, Lafayette gallantly greets Dolly. Although James was Lafayette's old friend, this would be the first time that Lafayette was introduced to Dolly. James and Dolly didn't even know each other when Lafayette was in America in the 1770s and 1780s. And that is Governor Barber on the left, and I'm afraid I do not remember the name of the gentleman who portrayed him, but he was affiliated with the current day Barbersville Winery. And finally, the two old friends shared reminiscences with the crowd. So it was quite a day. Now, if you're feeling nostalgic for last fall's reenactment or feeling disappointed if you missed it, all is not lost. You have another opportunity this weekend to celebrate Lafayette and Culpeper. Remember that when Lafayette left Montpelier on August 22nd, he was escorted to Culpeper by Captain Philip Slaughter for yet another dinner in his honor. So this weekend, Culpeper has some commemorative events in store. There will be a reenactment of General Lafayette and President Monroe arriving at historic Greenwood on Saturday morning, and then a public reception for Lafayette and Monroe at 11:30 at the Museum of Culpeper History. 2 high school bands are going to play a new march for Lafayette, which is actually not new anymore. It was composed in 1825 and played during Lafayette's American tour. And there will be activities in downtown Culpeper all afternoon. On Saturday night, there will be a Lafayette Grand Ball at Mountain Run Winery. And costumed attendees are invited to enjoy and join in an evening of period dancing. And finally, since Lafayette had breakfast in the Jeffersonton area on his way out of Culpeper County on the morning of August 24th, 1826, the Jeffersonton Community Center will host a breakfast and a morning of family-friendly fun activities this Sunday morning. Some of these events are ticketed, like the ball, but the events in downtown Culpeper and at the Jeffersonton Community Center are open to all. So just Google Culpeper Lafayette Bicentennial and you'll find all the details. The bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour has been commemorated with almost as many celebratory events as were held during Lafayette's actual farewell tour. It's a story that still captures our imagination and a story of national importance. It's also a very personal story to us at Montpelier, remembering the friendship between the Revolutionary General and the father of the Constitution, and celebrating the anniversary of the final time that James Madison extended to General Lafayette the warmth of my embrace on my own threshold here at Montpelier 200 years ago today. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording.